ratify the new constitution. Citizens debated if it existed as long as African Americans were excluded.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These words in the Declaration of Independence are simple, but they are the foundation of our rights as citizens. The Fifth Amendment states, "No person may be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. If the government infringes upon these natural rights or fails to provide due process, do the people have a right to revolution?" Locke argued that the mere threat of armed rebellion makes tyranny less likely. This concept is stated in the Declaration when it says, "Whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it." However, the citizens should not have the power to infringe upon others' rights during a revolution.
Not all revolutions require taking up arms. One can argue that any social or political change, big or small, can constitute a revolution. In fact, the transmission of administrations in 1801 from John Adams to Thomas Jefferson is often referred to as the Peaceful Revolution. The Civil War and the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments can be seen as a revolution. Jefferson was very supportive of these kinds of political changes. He stated that laws should expire after each generation so that revolution could occur. The right to revolution isn't just justified, it is a fundamental right.
The Declaration was one of the most radical documents of its time, with ideas of power of the people and stopping tyranny. These ideas disrupted what was seen as an acceptable way to govern for centuries. Historian Gordon Wood, in his book The Radicalism of the American Revolution, notes that the Declaration introduced new ideas of political and social equality, in sharp contrast to British traditions of monarchy and aristocracy. While some may have wanted to give George Washington the title of the king, he rejected the idea. And the Constitution would reflect this in its rejection of titles of nobility. The document also contained arguments of King George III, arguments that decades later would have been considered treasonous insults. In hindsight, the document could have been more radical and more egalitarian. When Thomas Jefferson wrote the first draft, he included a condemnation of slavery, but the language was removed from the final version.
"We the people" is a shortened expression for a once radical idea, that citizens derive the power to govern from themselves. Without the people's consent, the government has no authority to limit their freedom. Jefferson and the founders understood this. Lacking representation, they believed that the king had no power to tax them. Thus, they were morally justified in declaring independence. We are ready for your questions.
Outstanding, and I think we do have a few questions. Let's go back to this idea of popular sovereignty and the Constitution. Are there any places in the Constitution you can think of that might not support popular sovereignty? Is there any place where popular sovereignty might be pushed aside in the Constitution?
Well, when picking our Supreme Court justices, it really isn't decided by the people and don't really give their consent to picking them. It's more of just the leaders of our government who decide who we bring.
That is an excellent example that I had not even thought of, but I think that's great. Can you, what about the Electoral College? How consistent with popular sovereignty is the Electoral College?
I believe that the Electoral College is not consistent with popular sovereignty because, in a way, it's kind of placing checks on the authority of the people. With our ideas of federalism, we check the state government and we check the national government, but we're never intended to check the authority of the people.
Outstanding, great way.
But in my defense, I have to say that it's the citizens' choice to give their consent to the government and give them the permission to run the Electoral College and run the vote for themselves.
Okay, thanks so much. Who wants to go next? Mike, go ahead.
Okay. 4 years ago, a little more than that, 4.5, the day after the inauguration day of a new president, 1 million women went to Washington and marched, and they said there were more than 1 million. It was called the Million Woman March, but the police that tried to count said there were more than that. There were marches of that all over the country. In the last year, we've seen Black Lives Matter peaceful protests. 245 years after this was written, are there any people other than the two groups that have been out there so hard saying that they're being discriminated against? Are there any other people in our society today who should still feel disenfranchised or unrepresented as far as their rights are concerned? What about? Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. There are plenty of minority groups that are still being that still have many prejudices aimed towards them. We're at the beginning of COVID, especially, we saw a lot of discrimination against Asian Americans. People were calling them COVID-19 themselves just because of where COVID originated from.
That's the perfect, Jack, I was fixing to offer that as a prompt to the three of you to say, are Asian Americans still treated correctly? Since some of this is about the right to consent to be governed, the right to vote, if a person made a mistake at a young age and was convicted of a felony and sent to prison, but they served their time, he or she served their time, and they came out and they had a job and were earning money and were paying taxes and being a decent member of society, should a person who committed a felony be given their right to vote back, or was they made a mistake like that early on, is that right gone for good?
I personally think that if their mark improved as a person, they should be able to have rights to vote, and it shouldn't be taken away.
If one state, let's say that two cousins committed the same crime, one in Oregon and one in Indiana, and the California law said that they could vote again, and the Indiana law said that they couldn't vote again. Then on election day, when the cousin in California went and voted, and the cousin in Indiana who had committed basically the same felony and served their term couldn't vote, has the Constitution failed the person in Indiana by saying that everybody gets equal protection and equal treatment under the law? Has the Constitution failed when they leave a question that important to the state government of California and the state government of Indiana?
I think in that situation that the state government has failed because they're not ensuring equal suffrage on equal standards across the country.
But some would argue that the Constitution is at fault here because it's the Constitution's job to regulate if the states are giving equal rights to the people who reside inside of their state.
I'm good with that. I'm good. Ms. Reed?
So we've been talking about all the different ways that you might have given up a right or lost a right. When we watched all this, the tumult that happened on Capitol Hill, January the 6th, we know what a peaceful protest is. We know that wasn't one. But was that an appropriate revolution, or was that a riot? And did that infringe on your rights or those of the people who were in the House and the Senate? Or was it appropriate and those people were just expressing their rights?
I personally think it went out of hand when they stormed the building and took out a bunch of papers from Nancy Pelosi's office. And that just really shows what kind of a person that you are and your rights. But that doesn't mean you have to take it out on the hands of other people and their personal stuff.
Yeah, the right to revolution was not justified here because natural rights were not being threatened, that the rioters themselves were threatening others' rights.
Like we said in our speech, John Locke said that when government is too tyrannical, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. But the difference within here is that government was not being tyrannical. It was just a regular election that went inside an unfavorable way for their outcomes.
So all of you guys are American citizens, I assume, and yet we don't give you the right to vote. We don't give you a right to consent or withhold your consent. Should we do that, and does that absolve you from an obligation to obey? You got 2 seconds.
I kind of disagree. I think that we do have the consent. We have the ability when we go to public school, or, well, we don't go to public school, but when citizens go to public school when they are not eligible to vote, they are giving their consent to the government because public school is a government provided service.
Great place to end. Just a very good argument, very good discussion. That question of why do we not let teenagers vote? I suspect you could. I would put you guys in at least the state legislature, and with greater confidence than some of the state legislators I know. Great presentation. The fact that you began with the Mayflower Compact as your starting point, that was a very reasonable, rational place to begin an argument. You gave us SWOC and carried us down with both the specifics and the generalizations. So you start actually with the specifics, which I think is very powerful, and then you tell us the general idea, whether it's popular sovereignty or something else that connected to that. Very nicely done. Good responses to our questions.
Loved how you pulled together the right way to protest and the right way to define tyrannical and peaceful and rights, and then defined the very activities that happened January the 6th. I appreciate so much. I bet they absorb everything you say. I bet you $1. They're great. I really, really enjoyed your presentation.
I did too. I thought the historical background, the historical knowledge that you put in the essay was fun. Candy, I thought the suggestion that the 13th Amendment, 14th and 15th were revolutionary. They were. You think about revolution against the government. In a sense, that was a revolution by the government against states that were ignoring and refusing to grant the same rights. That's just a great approach to that question. That may be the best answer to a very pointed question that he asked that I'll hear all day. I loved that. If I understood what you were saying, I loved it. The last thing I want to say to you is it's remarkable that you could do this well, given what Google says about Richard of Wick. While you were introducing yourselves, I Googled it. Richard Wick is a fictional criminal character who was in a movie called The House of a Thousand Corpses. I know that's not who the school was named for. And the other mention of Richard Wick was a dim-witted robber who tried to rob Captain Spaulding in another movie. Please find out who Richard of Wick was, since you didn't get to go to the assembly, and get Ms. Neal to send it to us so that the 3 or 4 of us, Ms. Schaefer too, can rest assured that you're representing an honorable school named for an honorable person, and I'm sure you are. Ms. Neal, no team does as well as your team did today without a lot of influence from a really, really, really good teacher. And we could tell that for all the time we were with you. We could tell we want to give thanks for you as well today for what influence you've been in their lives. Thank you so much. Ms. Schaefer?
I'm gonna send you to your rooms. Actually, I'm inviting you, but you have
to keep changing the verb.
Depends on the round. This time I'm gonna send you for saying all those things about Richard of Wick. All right, guys, great work again today.
Thank you.